Halloween is my favorite time of the year, more than anything. I love decorating my front yard. It started when I was a kid. My parents always had elaborate decorations, and I kept the trend going with my own family. It bonded us, and I loved doing it. On top of that, my neighborhood has a bit of a reputation for going all out at Halloween time. It was a perfect fit. Each year, there was an informal competition between the houses on my street. When we first moved into the neighborhood, we kind of set the standard for decorations. My graveyard scenes were always elaborate, but when we moved into this house, I went above and beyond and added touches of flair, lights, smoke, and some small animatronics. Really made a life-size diorama out of it. I easily won the challenge the first 5 years, but after that 5th year, everyone else on our street upped their games. Before too long, our street was the most trick-or-treated street in the town. Honestly, it was a sight to behold, so many people coming together to scare the living hell out of each other. It was a sweet in a horror movie kind of way. It was around this time that the Johnsons moved in down the street. Tim and Joyce and their little boy Joey are some of the nicest people you could meet. His wife makes amazing lemon bar, and we're great friends 11 months out of the year. But around Halloween time, the Johnsons become my sworn enemies. Tim and Joyce work for a theme park, I'll let you guess which one, and they went all out for the holidays. The first year, they had their own graveyard scene that was, to be honest, nothing short of amazing. It far outdid my unearthed graves. It was clear they won the contest. I took it in stride, but the next day I started planning what I could do for the following year. It was petty, I know, but I wanted to win. I've lost 5 years running. Last week at a barbecue, Tim let it slip that they were working on a lab scene. I had tried that the last few years, but the results were mixed. I decided that I wanted to go back to a graveyard scene in my spare time. I'd been looking at how-to videos about creating more lifelike decorations and how to build cheap but effective animatronics, scouring Craigslist for supplies, and I was looking up various Pinterest boards. I know, I wanted to punch myself too, in order to have the best looking yard. I felt that with all the decorations I had already had, the ones I had found on Craigslist and my new knowledge, I was ready to win it all again. The Johnsons be damned, this was my year. The week before I was going to break out the decorations and get started, we had one of the most intense thunderstorms we've ever had in these parts. I felt like at any minute I'd look out my window and see the Wicked Witch flying by on a broom. We made plans just in case a tornado touched down, but nothing but hard rain fell, thankfully. When the storm finally ceased, I went into my garage to prepare my decorations and was gutted. The roof in the garage had a leak right above where I stored my supplies. Everything was ruined. The hopes of winning back my crown were dashed in a heartbeat. For a minute I thought that maybe this was for the best. I had spent a lot of spare time planning for this, and I had a honey-do list that was growing by leaps and bounds. Maybe I was a little too into the competition. This was probably healthy. I was planning on telling my family that we'd just do a simple display this year, but then my kids spent the night at their friend's house and my wife worked late. I was alone and had the entire internet to help solve my problem. I decided as a last-ditched effort to see what cheap supplies I could find online. If there was nothing, I'd throw in the towel. But that's when I saw an ad on Craigslist that caught my attention. I can't keep these things anymore, Halloween. It was weird enough to warrant a click, and I'm glad I did. Inside, someone was getting rid of years' worth of Halloween decorations. I called right away and told them I'd be there in 10 minutes to pick it up. The house was a bit off the beaten path, but nothing too crazy. The owner, on the other hand, tiptoed into Nutsoville. She said her name was Shade, which, whatever, it's a Craigslist buy, and that she was going to be moving soon. There wasn't any moving boxes or anything, and I didn't know if she was being honest, but I didn't care. She told me that she had held on to these things for as long as she could remember, but she had to get rid of them now. There were several trunks. I'd hit the mother lode. I pulled out my wallet and she stopped me. She said I could have them for free. I asked to see what was inside, but she really didn't want me opening them there. She said that they were too tightly packed and it might cause a mess. I wanted to make sure I wasn't just inheriting someone's junk, so I insisted. She sighed and ducked back into the house. When she returned, I noticed she had put on a handmade necklace. I asked about it, but she either didn't hear me or ignored me. It was probably some Etsy thing. So I just let it slide and cracked open the first trunk. There were bones. Not a complete skeleton, but odds and ends. Some cloaks, cauldrons, headstones. It was incredible. They were high quality stuff too. I again asked if she wanted anything for them and she said no, so I shrugged and loaded them into my truck and thanked her for the supplies. She muttered something under her breath and then slammed the front door. I wanted to get away from shade as possible, so I bolted home. When I got there, I dragged everything into the garage and unloaded everything. It was better than I could have ever hoped for. There were at least 5 full skeletons, 2 witch hats, a few brooms, lanterns, vials, and red and blue and green water in them, and so much more. I sketched out the design I wanted for the yard, and I was pleased with myself. I might have not had the animatronics I wanted, but these looked so good I might not need it. I had started setting up the yard when my wife got home with the kids. They were jazzed by the props, but my wife was confused. I told her that all my old supplies got ruined in the storm and that I had gotten all of these things for free online. I told her it was kismet. She seemed dubious. I swore they hadn't spent a dime on them, save for the cost of gas to pick them up. And as an added bonus, we got 5 new steamer trunks for free. They could be antiques and we could sell them. She was put off by the whole thing. They looked too real and it kind of made her sick to her stomach. Something about all of this was off to her. I reassured her that it was nothing. I thought if I showed her the trunks she might come around, but she didn't. She was looking over them and agreed they were old, but they made her feel worse. Along the side of the trunks, she noticed something carved into the wood. It was a cross inside a circle inside of a triangle. I told her it was probably just some old identification thing. Maybe it was the hobo code from the 1930s. These trunks were that old, but she didn't want to hear it. She told me that I could keep these for this year and then I would have to get rid of them next year. It was too much. Everyone would think that we had robbed a crypt or something. I must have spent all day working on my scene. 2 skeleton witches raising the bodies of fallen comrades crawling out of the grave while 2 minions held lanterns. Because, next thing I knew, the sun was gone and my porch light kicked on. I sat back and admired the scene. It was good, and it looked real. I grabbed the lighter and lit up all the lanterns. The orange gave the whole scene an eerie glow. The final touch, I placed those witch hats on the skeletons. It looked unsettling. I loved it. Before I was done, Tim came jogging by. He stopped and let out a whistle. He was impressed, and he asked if he could get a closer look at the skeletons, and I let him. He messed around with the bones and looked the skeletons up and down. He shook his head. "These are amazing." "Thanks," I said, beaming. "Picked them up this morning." "From where?" I said. "A magician doesn't reveal his secrets." "Looks like I have to pull out all the stops," he said, nodding goodbye and continuing with his jog. As he ran away, I muttered half-jokingly, "So long, Nemesis." I went inside for a soda and some TV and a deep, satisfied sleep. It was about 3 in the morning when my daughter started screaming across the house. I dashed up and found her outside her bedroom in tears. I asked what was wrong, and all she could say was that someone was looking in her window. I grabbed the bat and went out the front door. There wasn't anyone, but someone was looking into her window. It was one of the skeleton witches. I walked over to the decorations and looked down at the ground. There were footprints around the window, and it looked like the skeleton had been dragged from where they had been. I figured neighborhood kids were pulling a prank. Wouldn't be the first time they messed around and dragged the skeleton back to its spot. The next day, when I went out for work, I noticed that one of the skeletons that had been on the ground seemed to have been moved around. His bones were a bit more scattered than before. Again, there were footprints, but nothing much else. I thought about getting security cameras, but then I remembered how much they cost, and this was just a temporary problem. In less than a month, this would be over. That night, around midnight, I was sitting in my living room, half paying attention to whatever Netflix show I was watching and bullshitting around online. But that's when I heard something outside moving around. I glanced up and nearly had a heart attack. Someone had put the witch skeleton in the living room window. After I collected myself, I listened and heard hushed whispering outside in my front yard. The kids were still there. I decided to repay the favor and scare the hell out of them. I ran around to my back door and snuck outside. It was colder than I thought, and I could see my breath. I hadn't been cold inside. I tiptoed to the gate and quietly opened it. I walked softly along the side of my house, waiting to jump out and scare the kids. Right as I got to the edge of the house, I heard more hushed whispering. They were still there. I psyched myself up and then jumped out from my hiding spot, screaming like a madman. But that's when one of the skeleton witches fell to the ground, and I heard what sounded like footsteps on the pavement run in the opposite direction. Down the street, I saw figures running away, or so it seemed. I was pissed I didn't get a good view, and they had come back a second time. I decided to call the cops. Naturally, when the cops showed up, they looked bored with my story. They said absence of any kind of evidence, they can't really do anything. They could increase patrols through the neighborhood, but that was about it. They looked at the footprints and agreed that someone had been there, but they had just hopped back into their squad car and rolled away. The next night, we managed to make it through without any incident. I started to think that maybe my scaring act had worked, but the following night I heard voices again from outside my window. They had come back, and instead of scaring, I called 911 and waited for the red and blue lights to come cruising by. When they finally did 3 hours later, the kids had left, and it was the same cops as the night before, and they looked less than amused. They again assured me that they would roll more cars nearby, but honestly they didn't expect to catch anyone. They suggested that I consider moving the figure in the night, or maybe getting a motion detector for the front porch light before they left. And at this point, my wife wanted me to just take down the decorations. They were unsettling her. The kids weren't exactly thrilled with them either, and the idiots in the neighborhood keep messing with them. I heard her, but I also was pretty adamant that these were isolated incidents and they will die down when the rest of the neighborhood's decorations went up. She told me fine, but I could tell she wasn't happy with me. I promised that if something else happened, I would take them down immediately, and she said not only would I take them down, but I would get rid of them, and I agreed. For the next few days, things were fine. I felt like I had vanquished the teens, and with increased police presence, the decorations didn't move again. My kids warmed up to them, especially when I added some fun lights around them to lighten up the mood. Even my wife had to admit that things were better. About a week later, I went out in the morning for work, and I noticed that the strand of lights I had decorated the skeletons with had been removed, but they weren't gone exactly. Someone had tied them into a noose, and I didn't tell anyone, just grabbed it and tossed it into my car. That night, I decided to stay up late to make sure that no one was fucking with me. I'm not going to lie. For a minute, I thought it might be Tim. Maybe he was really intimidated by my design, but I pushed that away as being crazy. Our rivalry was fun, not anything too serious. Tim was nice. He's been in my house. His wife had amazing lemon bars. I was just paranoid. Around 1 a.m, I heard footsteps coming down from the sidewalk in front of my house. It sounded like someone was running, and a dull thwack rang in the night air. I thought it might be the kids returning to go fuck with my things. I moved to the living room window and peered out into the darkness. It took me a minute for my eyes to adjust to the dark, but when they did, I noticed that one of the witch skeletons was missing. Those damn kids were back at it. I needed evidence this time, so I knew I was going to have to record them in the act, show the local cops I wasn't crazy. I walked out my back door, and as quietly as I could, I pulled out my cell phone. Unlike the other night, I did not want to scream at them. I got to my gate and slowly opened it. I nearly passed out. The witch skeleton was standing there. I fell back and dropped my phone on the concrete. I let out a little yell, but stifled it with my hands. For some reason, I expected the skeleton to move, but it just stood there, the empty eye socket staring forward. I stood up, dusted myself off, and slid past the skeleton. I hit record on my camera and prayed my scared yelp hadn't scared away the teens. When I got to the end of my house, I edged my phone around the corner and looked at the screen. I was expecting to see a few teens laughing and moving shit around. The camera lens struggled to focus, and when it finally did, I didn't see any teens. There was no laughing. There wasn't anything. All the decorations were gone. I walked out from behind the house, confused. I stumbled over to the lawn and saw footprints all over, but nothing else. Where the hell had everything gone? Just then, I heard footsteps running away from where I had just come from. I ran around the house and stopped, stunned. The skeleton that was standing near my gate was gone too. I felt a chill go down my spine. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't neighborhood kids just fucking with me. I heard what sounded like cackle coming from my front lawn and then saw orange in the reflection on my car's windshield. I walked back to my front yard and saw that my lawn was on fire. Only it wasn't just some random blaze, it was by design. It was a cross inside a circle inside a triangle. Just like it was on the trunks. I grabbed my hose and was going to spray the fire, but as quickly as it turned on, the fire went out. I heard a faint cackle again. This time it sounded like it was on my roof. I didn't want to see if anything was there. I ran back into my house and locked all the doors. I stayed up for hours, and the following day I was a wreck, but didn't want to scare my family. I told my wife that she was right and that those decorations were weird, and I decided to take them down last night. She was happy at first, but then she looked out of the front window and frowned. Really funny, she said, flipping me off. I went to the window and opened it wide. They were all back in the same places they had been, except the two witch skeleton skulls had been turned. One faced my front window and the other was looking off down the street. I felt a chill run down my body. All day at work, I couldn't shake what happened. I googled a cross inside a circle inside a triangle picture, but didn't find much at first. But 20 or so pages into the search, I found something that made my heart race. The webpage said that the drawing was related to witchcraft. Specifically, it was a symbol often carved into the coffins of witches that had been burned at the stake. But these symbols were old, like 1600s old. It was thought that the symbol kept the witches' remains from acting up again. If the coffins had been opened, the witches would be free to cause havoc. As long as they were sealed and marked, things were fine. But if they were released... My mouth went dry. I felt my eye twitching. My stomach was churning. I left work early, barely able to give my boss a reason for splitting at noon. I rushed home to my empty house. I wanted these things gone before my family was home. I grabbed the trunks and dragged them to the front yard. I started disassembling the bones and throwing everything inside those trunks. I know it sounds crazy, but I could feel them staring at me as I tossed them back into the trunks. As soon as I finished packing up the last box into my truck, I saw Tim walking towards me. He had stayed home from work. He asked me what was going on. Oh, the kids didn't like them. Too scary. Decided to take them down. They were pretty realistic too. Plus, some kids in the neighborhood were messing with them every other night, moving them around and shit. Don't want to have to deal with that anymore. Tim started laughing. That makes sense now, he said. I thought I saw one of those things walking down the street the other night. What? I came down for a glass of water and it looked like one of them was walking down the street. I was spooked to hell at first, but then I realized it was just crazy. It was probably those kids moving them around like you said. I forced a smile, but I wanted to die. Yeah, they were giant assholes. I found them all over. I think I'm going to wait until closer to Halloween to put my stuff out. I don't want you to look out and see a mad scientist strolling down the street at midnight. I forced a laugh. Hey, he said, if you don't want these, can I take them off your hands? I really admire the craftsmanship. I wanted to win a decorating contest, but not that bad. Man, I wished you had asked me earlier, but a buddy of mine at work is taking them. Damn, well, at least they're going to a good home. Yep, I slammed the gate to my truck and said goodbye. I drove back to Shade's house, and not surprisingly, she had moved out. The place looked as sinister as it had before, worse now because it had been abandoned. Fuck it. She is getting these things back. I backed my truck into her driveway and went to get rid of the trunks. When I opened the gate, I felt a pain in my stomach, and my head started pounding. Normally, I would have been laid out by the pain, but I fought through it and quickly unloaded the trunks into Shade's empty driveway. I didn't care how they landed, only that they weren't near me. I thought I had heard one of them crack when it hit the ground, but I didn't stick around to find out. I'd hopped back into my truck and took off. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror, and I swear I saw the skeleton witches standing in the driveway. Maybe I was seeing things, but I didn't care. They were gone and out of my life. Things were fine for the rest of the month. Halloween came and went, the Johnsons won the decorating contest again, and my family had an amazing time trick-or-treating. My wife was pleased that the skeletons were gone, and I just tried to forget that they were ever there. Things went back to normal. What's odd, though, is every so often when I'm up and late and the wind starts to howl, I swear to God, I hear cackling.